Hey guys, it's Amanda, your Center Director for Mathnasium of Great Neck, and as you can see, I'm in my kitchen. So today I'm going to be making some chocolate chip M&M cookies using a recipe, and if you want to see the full video all put together, that'll be available on the Great Neck YouTube. I'll have a link at the end of this post. Otherwise, today I'm going to be showing you how to make those step by step by both using conversions and time-elapse calculations and such. So I hope you enjoy, and I'm going to get started. My friend gave me this awesome recipe for chocolate chip M&M cookies. I cannot wait to use it. The only problem is that she gave me the recipe for 2 batches. I don't need to eat that many cookies. I don't know who could eat that many cookies. No, that's not true. I know plenty of people who could eat that many cookies, but I don't need to make that many cookies. So what I need to do is I need to break this in half so that I can only do a single batch of cookies. And so in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some conversions. I know. And then I'm also going to have to do some halving of some mixed numbers. So let's get to it. So if you guys take a look at my recipe, the first thing I need to do is to cut 4.5 cups of flour in half. We're going to do this real easy. We're going to start with 4 1/2. And we're going to split it up. We're going to have 4 and we're going to have 1/2. Now, half of 4 is pretty easy. We just divide 4 by 2. And our answer is 2. But when we have to get to the 1/2, dividing 1/2 in half actually becomes kind of a multiplication problem. You see, a half of a half is a quarter. So intuitively, I know that it's 1/4. But in order to figure that out for real using math, we have to take 1/2 and divide it by 2, and that ends up looking kind of funky, right? Because what we're actually seeing is 1/2 divided by 2 over 1. Now when we divide a fraction, it's the same as multiplying by what we call the reciprocal, or the inverse. And the inverse of 2 over 1 is 1 over 2. And multiplying fractions is a lot easier because you just multiply straight across. So 1 times 1 and 2 times 2. So 1/2 becomes 1/4 by doing all this. So 2 and 1/4. And then you see we have 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. Now the problem is that if you take a look at my measuring spoons, I've got 1 tablespoon and then everything else is in teaspoons. So first we got to convert 1 tablespoon of cornstarch to teaspoons. Now if you don't know what that conversion is, 1 tablespoon, TBSP, is equal to 3 teaspoons, TSP. So a double batch calls for 3 teaspoons. Now I need a single batch, which means I need to cut 3 teaspoons in half. So 3 teaspoons divided in half is equal to 3 over 2. So 3 divided by 2 is equal to 1. And then 1 as a remainder ends up being 1 and 1 over 2. So I need 1 1/2 teaspoons for my single batch recipe. Up next is 1.5 cups of melted butter. So if we wanted to do this the same way as we did the cups of flour, we could take 1 and 1/2 and break them apart. 1/2, and we know that 1/2 converts to 1/4. So we start with 1 1/2 cups, and we could break the 1 in half, and half of 1 is half, and a half of a half is 1/4. But then we got to add fractions, which we can totally do. So if we add fractions, we need to find an equivalent fraction to 1/2 so that it makes adding our fractions easier. The way that we do that is we find a common denominator. So what is a common denominator of 2 and 4? So that would be, let's multiply 2 times 2 so we can get it into 4s. And anything we do to the top or bottom, we do to the opposite. So 2 times 2 got us 4. So 1 times 2 gets us 2/4. So 1/2 is equal to 2/4. And then we just add them together. 2/4 plus 1/4 equals 3/4. So the next thing we need to do is we need to convert 3/4 of a pint into cups. Because I don't know about you, but measuring cups, they use cups. All right, so 3/4 of a pint. We need to first figure out what our conversion is from pints to cups. Now I know that 1 pint is equal to 2 cups. So whatever we do to our pints to cups, we need to just multiply times 2. So 3/4 of a pint times 2. And when we multiply times a whole number, it's the same as multiplying by over 1. So 2 is actually equal to 2/1. And so we just multiply across. 6, 3 times 2, and 4. And when we convert this into a mixed number, we divide the numerator by the denominator. And so 6 divided by 4 is equal to 1. The remainder 2. And when we deal with remainders, we put it over the divisor. So 6 divided by 4 equals 1 2/4. And we all know that when we simplify 2/4, it becomes 1 1/2. So we now know that our recipe calls for 1 1/2 cups of light brown sugar. And then we're just going to divide it by 2 like we did last time. And so we know that half of 1 1/2 is 3/4. So we're going to have 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. Now when we go back to do our eggs and our egg yolks, when we're cutting those in half again, we know that half of 2 is 1. So we can skip doing the math on those two. But then we get to 1 1/3 tablespoons vanilla. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like cutting thirds in half. It just feels funky. So I think the easiest way to deal with that one is to convert it into a improper fraction first. So 1 1/3, we multiply our 1 times 3, which is 3, and we add it to the 1 on top. So 1 1/3 becomes 4/3. And then 4/3 is a lot easier to divide in half because all we do is divide the numerator in half, and half of 4 is 2. So we need 2/3 of a tablespoon of vanilla. But you know what? Tablespoons, they don't come in fractions on my measuring spoons. Remember how we had to make it teaspoons? So if we go and we look at our conversion, remember it was 3 teaspoons for every 1 tablespoon. And that makes it really cool because we know that we need 2/3. So 2/3 of 1 tablespoon would be 2 teaspoons. So we need 2 teaspoons of vanilla. For our 1 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips, we know that that's just going to be a half cup of chocolate chips. And then last, we have 16 tablespoons of M&Ms. Not sure why she gave me such a weird one, but for tablespoons to cups, it's literally 16 tablespoons is equal to 1 cup. So we know that that last one, that's just 1 cup of M&Ms. So we also only need a half a cup of M&Ms. So if we take our original recipe and we cut it in half, we get this recipe. And so now I'm going to go ahead and start my measurement. So as it turns out, guys, my recipe is missing its salt. So I'm going to include it in the video. There's a half a teaspoon of salt, and I'm going to include it in the instructions, but it's not listed on the recipe that I have in the video. So just keep that in mind, guys. There is a half a teaspoon in a single batch of these cookies. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure out our dry ingredients. So that's 1 cup. There's cup number 2. And a 1/4 cup. There we go with 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of cornstarch, and a half teaspoon of cornstarch. Now in my family we use pink Himalayan salt, and as you can see it's got some pretty big chunks in there, so I'm going to have to grind out the half teaspoon of salt that I need. It's going to be a little difficult to put it into a measuring spoon, so I'm just going to grind it straight into the bowl and eyeball it. I've been baking for a number of years, so I'm feeling pretty confident about it. And then we're just going to all throw it into one big bowl. And whisk it together. Just want to make sure it's all nice and combined. I think that looks pretty good. So, my half cup measure broke, so I'm going to be doing a half a cup of sugar and 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar by using 1/4 cups. So that's 2 1/4 cups is equal to a half cup of sugar, and 3/4 cups is obviously 3 1/4 cups of brown sugar. So here goes. 1 1/4 cup, 2 1/4 cups, 1 1/4 cup brown sugar, 2 1/4 cups brown sugar, come on, and 3 1/4 cups brown sugar. We're combining our 3/4 cup brown sugar, half cup of white sugar, adding in 3/4 of a cup, can't tell if you can tell, melted butter. And we're going to whisk this together until no sugar lumps remain. So I'm going to do this off camera. So this is what it should look like. No lumps. This next step, we're going to whisk in our 1 egg. And then we're going to add our single yolk. We're going to whisk that in. Then we're going to add our 2 teaspoons of vanilla and whisk that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our wet ingredients. So now we're going to pour our wet ingredients into our dry ingredients. And we're going to mix with a large wooden spoon or plastic spatula. So I'm going to get to it. So this is what your batter should look like now, or your dough rather, however you want to say it. And now I'm going to fold in my chocolate chips. So as you can see, I've got a half cup of chocolate chips I'm about to dump in. Now we're just going to fold it in. And there's our chocolate chip cookie dough. Now I'm going to cover this and I'm going to put it in the fridge for 2 hours. For this recipe, putting it into the fridge for at least 2 hours is very important. You can leave it in there for up to 3 days, totally up to you. But make sure when you take it out of the fridge that you let it soften for 10 minutes. So I just put my dough away, it was 1:45. Hey Megan, can you tell me what time that means I need to take it out of the fridge?
Since you put the dough in your fridge at 1:45 and we're gonna wait 2 hours before we take it out, all we have to do is count up. So 1:45 to 2:45 and then 2:45 to 3:45. So take your dough out of your fridge at 3:45.
So guys, I just started preheating my oven to 325 degrees, and I'm taking 2 baking trays and I'm putting parchment paper on them to line them. So my dough is now out of the fridge and I'm gonna let it sit for 10 minutes. Okay guys, it's been 10 minutes. Now, time to roll some dough balls. We're gonna put them on the baking sheet and I'll tell you how long it's gonna take to bake them. So this recipe says to roll them taller rather than wide. So as you can see, they look a little bit more like eggs than they do like balls. Now we're gonna bake them at that 325 degrees for 11 to 12 minutes and we'll see how they come out. All right guys, so I'm pulling them out of the oven. Now, my instructions say that they're going to look a little underbaked. You're to let them cool on the pan for about 10 minutes. All right, guys, put them in the oven. I'll see how this goes. So while my cookies were cooling, I went ahead and added the M&Ms for decoration. I made a couple of math numbers and math symbols, but normally you would add the M&Ms at the chocolate chip stage. So keep that in mind if you want them to be true chocolate chip M&M cookies, that is when you should be doing it. But it's been 10 minutes of them cooling, so now I'm going to move them to my cooling rack. Alright guys, let's see how this batch came out. Looks like I need to keep them a little bit more separate. Alright, gonna let them cool and drop the next batch in. And we'll see how they go. Okay guys, pulling out that batch. Now remember, they're supposed to look a little underdone, and as they cool, they'll bake just a little bit more on the bottoms. Last batch going in. But they are cooked, and they're gonna stay chewy for days, and that's the awesome part if you store them in an airtight container. The recipe says that it can last up to 10 days. That's a long time for awesome chewy cookies. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and decorate this batch now. Okay guys, last batch coming out. I really gotta start separating them better. Too bad it's the last batch. Alright guys, so these are all the cookies. Well, minus a couple of taste tests. I couldn't help it. They're delicious. I had so much fun baking these, and they were so yummy. You guys should definitely check out the recipe book, Sally's Baking Addiction. It's got a whole bunch of awesome stuff in it, but you should also totally make these cookies because they're delicious. Now here's a couple of math problems using my decorated cookies. Let's see if you can answer them in the comments. Bye!